Welcome to episode 173 of Girl Take the Lead, where each week we explore womanhood and leadership. And I'm your host, Yo Kenny. Julie B., Millennial, joins me to discuss her new book, Burned: How Business Owners Can Overcome Burnout and Fuel Success. In addition to being an author, Julie is a business coach and speaker. She has solidified her reputation as a dynamic consultant, a riveting speaker, and a leader who sheds light on the darker side of business ownership. She shares her personal burnout story with us and impresses upon us that burnout is an epidemic and overcoming it by taking a vacation, getting more exercise, and incorporating meditation into our days isn't the advice we all need. Here are some of the topics we covered in the episode: defining burnout, the burnout process, red flags to look for, battling burnout, women exiting the workplace, and steps for personal recovery from burnout. Enjoy the listen. Here you go. Julie B., welcome to Girl Take the Lead. We talked like back in April, I think. And so I'm excited that we're going to have this conversation and have this episode because I think you have so much to offer us about burnout. And so welcome.
Thanks for having me, Yo. Anytime we bring up burnout, I feel like often there's that collective sigh of like, we're talking about it, we have to talk about it. And it is like there's that, okay, we're gonna talk about it.
But that's one of the solutions, right? Being able to talk about it. But before we get too far down the path, would you please introduce yourself to our listeners and let them know about your writing and what you're up to?
Absolutely. So I'm Julie B, and I have been an entrepreneur for almost 16 years at this point. And I am also an author. I have a book that is out now. It's called Burned: How Business Owners Can Overcome Burnout and Fuel Success. And honestly, I am a coach and a speaker, and I basically help business owners and leaders at this point prevent burnout and make sure that they know what the signs are, just anything about burnout. It isn't so much about, a lot of what I do is try to help them, not burn out. And
Mhm.
I do work with people who are burned out, but I try to catch it before it gets too bad. And, for business owners, if you're burned out, your business is not going to run efficiently and effectively, and other things start to suffer. So I really believe it's probably the number two cause
Yeah.
why businesses don't make it, and I want to prevent them as much of it as possible.
Wow. And in your book, you kind of talk from the very beginning that you had your own wake up call around burnout. I think that'd be great to tell our listeners a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So, clear as day, it was August 2021. I woke up one morning and there was a lot going on. So, kind of leading up to this, it was just too much stress, just too much stuff, right? I woke up one morning and I thought I was having a heart attack. I had my blood pressure was like 150 over 110. My pulse was through the roof, sweaty, clammy, nauseous, all chest pressure, shortness of breath, all of these symptoms of a heart attack. And I was 40 years old. So, that's really challenging to kind of have turn 40 and then have that happen as well. But basically, I went to the emergency room and all the workups, and it was a panic attack. It wasn't a heart attack, thank goodness. It was not a heart attack, but it was the first. I've had anxiety attacks, but I think it was the first time I've had like a true panic attack.
Mm.
And it really does feel like you're dying. I mean, I don't know how else to describe it. They show up differently for everybody. So went to the emergency room, got diagnosed, and then just started a journey from that of dealing with my burnout and actually doing something about it that was more than the advice that I got in the hospital that day, which was do less, take a vacation, set better boundaries.
Wow.
All fantastic advice, but
Yeah.
how do you do that?
Well, and I think your book explores those, right? Like
Mhm.
they they aren't necessarily solving the problem, right?
Yeah, and it's I love a vacation as much as the next person, but in my book I talk about vacations as when you're taking a vacation to escape something, it's not going to it's not going to fix the problem. You're going to come back to the problem. So vacations for me are definitely part of a more of a prevention plan around burnout. But it's one thing to be able to go on vacation or set better boundaries. But the problem that I had and the reason I wrote my book was when I did research, I went to Google, I went looking for like, well, how do you set boundaries? How do you do this as a business owner specifically, as and even extending into as a leader
Mm-hmm.
specifically. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's probably the bigger topic is how do you do that effectively? And there really wasn't a lot out there. Kind of reiterating like, yeah, set boundaries, take break, take a
Mm-hmm.
sabbatical, but how to actually do that I couldn't, there wasn't a manual out there. And so I started creating and I wrote down what I did to
Mm-hmm.
go through this. And that's how my book was born.
Well, I think you're also describing like the process kind of at the end point, right? And that what you talk about is finding and being the observer of some of those things that lead up to that stressful point
Mm-hmm.
that just keeps chronically happening so that you're in that moment of burnout.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so what did you see there? What did you see as the process that you think we go through to help us better identify when things are hooking us or triggering us?
The first step is I think as a collective society, the first thing I had to get over, and then now I coach my clients to kind of move through is to drop the guilt and the shame around burnout. Especially like, and I know a lot of your audience are women. I think women tend to have more burnout for a lot of reasons because we have like caregiving roles and things like that. But I, there's also a lot of guilt, when you're a mom who's running a business, for example, or leading an organization, you feel guilt if you feel like you can't if you feel guilt if you're saying this is too much
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's some standards and some things that I didn't found in my research that make us feel that way, but I think overall the first thing you have to do is be able to say like I'm burned out. And you've
Mm-hmm.
got to have the other thing that I think is really crucial is having a support team. So that can be one person. That can literally be in your personal life. It might be your significant other or best friend or something like that. And at work, it might be, a key employee or a coach or a mentor or something along those lines. But it's absolutely essential to number one, be able to claim and be able to just say like I'm burned out without it
Mm-hmm.
being trying to not carry that guilt around that. And then two, having somebody to actually say that too, who is going to listen and then try to support you and help you come through it. So I think those were some of the research and some of the conversations. Those were the two themes that just kept coming up for me
Mm-hmm.
when I was writing my book.
And so I know that Brene Brown talks a lot about overwhelm.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what I'm hearing you speak a little bit too is that, the difference between stress and overwhelm, that stress is something you can delegate to somebody else to help you out. You're still kind of coherent about what's
Yeah.
going on. But when you get to overwhelm, it's tied up with all kinds of things and all you can really do is take yourself out and give yourself almost a timeout to do
Mm-hmm.
nothing, to
Mm-hmm.
be able to kind of come back to um, center at some point,
Yeah.
could take time to overcome that. Do you see that as
And
kind of,
it's hard. I would say I don't think it's doing nothing. I think it's prioritizing what you're doing.
Okay.
So I think, and it's interesting that people like Brene Brown and a lot of people who have talked about this, they do use, I try to, I'm very blunt and very direct. So I try
Sure.
to not, the word overwhelm is accurate, but it's different from burnout. So, I look
Mhm.
for people using code words. So, words like frustrated, disengaged, overwhelmed, stressed. Those don't necessarily mean you're burned out, but those are oftentimes code words we use to describe burnout. So I think that that's also like just in general, if you're talking with somebody and they're constantly saying they're overwhelmed, they're overwhelmed, they're overwhelmed,
Yeah.
it might be a place where you can say, are you actually burned out? So that's just one thing to,
Yeah.
just kind of think about. But in terms of what we actually do, I do think that when we do kind of have that critical, I guess, a crisis point, like my trip to the emergency room, there's definitely a moment where I had to do nothing for a
Mhm.
few days. I mean,
Mhm.
I was laying on my couch,
Yeah.
doing nothing for a few days. But then after that, and this was why I wrote my book, I felt like I had to do something, but I didn't know what to do. And what I've discovered in my process and what a lot of people discover is it's going through things like saying no to new opportunities that come up or pausing initiatives that initiatives at work or even at home, like if you're in the middle of a kitchen remodel,
Mhm.
that might be too much for that, couple of weeks. You might need to pause that for a little while. Stuff like that. You've got to be able to, there's still an act of doing to get through burnout, to deal with burnout. So
Yes, that's
that's
right. That's
that's the
right.
challenge, is that a lot of us are told you have to just stop doing so much or do less. I don't think that's the right answer. I think the right answer is you got to reflect on what you are doing and
Mm.
better prioritize whatever it is you need, and usually there are a couple of things that I recommend people do, but then after that, can anybody else do this? Is this really adding value to my life or my work right now? Can it
Right.
wait? There are some questions we can ask to really let go of some things for at least a little while.
Well, when we were coming on, I mentioned to you that I caught myself, a few days ago feeling the same kind of nervous anxiety in my
Hmm.
body. Like my body was going "Boo," over this. I'm going to be launching an e-business portion to the website, and that has to do with the podcast. And I'm hand making cards with messages and sentiments that I think are appropriate for our listeners. And I was just feeling like the way I felt when I was back in the job,
Hmm.
working where I was, just sort of pushing through. And I went, whoa, whoa, it's not seeming fun right now. What is going on? Let's stop for a moment. Let's take an assessment. And I went, what are you working towards? And I went, oh, you think that the deadline you set for this can't be changed, right? I'm the only one who set the deadline. There isn't like a, a manager or a company or business.
Hmm.
It's my business. I get to set the tone, I get to set the deliverable.
Yeah.
And I went, okay, if we don't make June 24, that's not going to kill anybody. That's
Yeah.
okay. It's all right. Just let it go. So I don't know. You're kind of laughing through it. I guess you identify with some of when you're in your business, when you're doing your own thing,
Hmm.
that sometimes we have these things that we just put on ourselves.
Well, first of all, congrats on launching the new initiative.
Oh, well,
That's exciting.
it's
Yeah,
still
that's
got a little time to go.
yeah, I get it though. Trust me, I get
Yeah.
it. I was laughing because so much of what you said is you're doing the work.
Mhm.
So a lot of what you said. So you recognize that and that,
Yeah. In your
push
body,
through
right?
thought.
Yeah.
You felt it, you heard it. I talk about isolating your burnout thoughts, and or at least knowing what your like what are thoughts that you have that may indicate you're heading towards burnout. You have
Mm.
those. Like, that's
Mhm.
what that is. I also think it's funny. I was that unrealistic expectation thing. I tell you what, entrepreneurs, business owners, high achieving people who have like high drive and just go, go, go. We're the best at that, aren't we?
Uh-huh.
We are
Totally.
fantastic at that.
Totally.
And it is so that's an example of, a great job on your part of stepping back and saying, hold on, wait a second. What would happen if it was 2 weeks later?
Right.
What's the worst that's going to happen?
Right.
Like, so I was laughing because you're doing the work that I describe in my book, like in different
Yeah.
parts of it,
Yeah.
but you're
Yeah.
doing it. And
I think
that's,
you
yeah,
definitely talk about
yeah.
becoming aware,
Mm-hmm.
like you really have to, because so many times, like you've said, we get these definitions of here's stress. This is
Mm-hmm.
what it looks like. Here's overwhelm. Here's burnout,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And the recognizing it in yourself, like being still for a moment, being quiet enough to be able to say, yeah, maybe I'm doing too much right now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'm trying to tell myself to chill and to just, you know, take a moment to just get centered again. Because
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm sure we can all get this way. We just go off. And in the doing of things, we're not observing what's going on. We got to get things done. We got to get the kids here. We got to do all these, multitasking. I could give an Olympic sport on multitasking, as I'm sure a lot of my listeners could too. But yeah.
It's I went through a very interesting journey with writing my book, and it started with that burnout, and I actually finished the first no, actually, I finished, that was the last draft, sitting in a hospital room with my dad, who was recovering from
Mhm.
pneumonia because he had had strokes. I mean, I had this time last year when I was finishing my book, I was finishing the content of my book for my publisher. My dad was in and out of the hospital with 3 strokes
Oh,
within 3 months, and then a round of pneumonia that led to him being in a rehab facility for 2 weeks, and then transitioning him home, and then helping my parents sell their house, and then helping them move from a home to a 2-bedroom
uh,
condo.
yeah.
And I finished a book during that time. So that
You're
is, and
amazing.
I shared that story because I think that's why it's important to have tools how to actually work with your burnout and work with these things that are happening. There were
Mhm.
definitely days where I woke up and I said to myself, I am burned out. I cannot work today, when that was going on.
Yeah.
But because I had done all of this work, because had created this process, I knew exactly what was happening. I knew exactly what to do. I just and I did it, and luckily I had my wife and my best friend who were supporting me and taking those actions, and a team. I have a couple of people who work for me at work that I was able to actually say, I'm not going to be in today. Like,
Mhm.
I can't work right now. So I think this is exactly why I talk about, we have plans for leadership development, or HR or sales or marketing strategies, all this stuff. But why not have a plan for this as well? Because it's going to
Mhm.
happen. I mean, even if you have a business that, like, even if everything seems great, you
Yeah,
life
stuff
happens.
happens.
Life happens,
Right.
life happens to
Mhm.
everybody.
Mhm.
And if you don't have a plan, it's not necessarily planning what's going to happen. Something's going to happen. It's planning, like, when it's you have we have the amazing gift to be able to say, okay, here's what I could do when this happens, just to have like a contingency plan so that like, okay, well,
Yeah.
I'm going to do these activities when this happens.
So for me, the red flag kind of showed up in my body.
Mhm.
Is that typically how you see it, or are there other red flags that you've come across with some of your clients that um, could come up and pop up?
I actually find that most, unless you've done some reflection work and some introspective work, most of us aren't that attuned to what's going on in our body all the time. So
Mm-hmm.
again, bravo to you. You've obviously done some work to be able to notice that. I would say for most of it, a lot of the times it'll be somebody else saying something to you.
Oh, uh-huh.
So, or you can look for things. I mean, some of the big ones are sleep, you're getting sick all the time. When you get to that point, though, I feel like you're kind of bordering on a crisis. So I
Mhm.
always try to help people find it before then. And there's three types of burnout that I see, and I believe you go through them in this order. The first one is attentional, and that usually shows up with, for leaders, it's they can't make decisions, they're having a hard time focusing. You may be working just as much but getting half as much done. That's something like you just don't, you feel like you're just not, it's just not coming out, it's just
Yeah,
not
it's like
happening.
it's almost like you're in mud or sludge.
Yep.
It's like
Yep.
slow. You're
You're not innovating,
yeah.
you're not able to clearly, you're not able to get a thought across very clearly. There's a lot of things, but that's usually the first one that I
Mhm.
see. It's more of a, and other people will often observe that in you. They'll say, one thing that I always tell leaders to look out for is, how long is it taking you to make a decision that maybe it would have taken you a week to make when you weren't stressed? Is it taking you a
Mhm.
month to make that decision? Are you not making that decision? Indecision and inaction are also signs that I kind of look at for attentional burnout. So that's the first one. And so those are like, a lot of the times, another good sign of this is when your team is asking you repeatedly to make a decision,
Mm,
or your wife or your partner or your best friend is like, "Hey, are we going on that trip? I've been waiting on you for a month to tell me." Like,
yeah.
if other people are waiting on you to make decisions, sometimes that can be an indicator of burnout. So those are just some things that I see at that stage. Um, if we don't catch it there, it usually goes into what I call emotional burnout. And that's the type of burnout where, kind of summarizing all of that one up, is that you just don't have any more cares to give, however you want to say that. You're just like, you might be numb, you might be more irritable than you usually are,
Mm,
you might be just indifferent, or you might be apathetic. But it really, I think the overall summary of that stage is, I don't care.
mm,
Like, whatever you want to do, I don't care. Like, and you actually don't care. You're just like, just do it. I don't care. So those are the two. I try to help people catch it there before it gets into your physical burnout symptoms. Now, I will say those two, I think people do feel it. I just don't think they're as attuned to what they're feeling. I think that a lot of us run in a high gear all the time.
yeah.
And so if it's a high gear about one thing or another, it doesn't really matter, because we just, it's just our normal pace.
Right. Mm. Well, we talked a little bit about some ways to battle, this burnout, and I guess it's almost, we've talked about some of the prevention, and now when it's actually present, and we talked a little bit about how you get at the core issues underneath that are making this happen. Are you
Mm-hmm.
working with belief systems and things to try and help somebody begin to see that maybe they're hooked by something they don't need to be hooked by?
Yes. Yeah. The short answer is, uh, there's usually a values
Mm.
misalignment somewhere,
Mm,
whether it's work, whether it's personal. Sometimes as we mature, our value systems change as well. So You may be in a role at a job or in a business. I mean, I was running a business where my values no longer aligned with that business, and I
Mm,
exited my first business because of it. Um, I think that there's often a values misalignment, and that's at the core of a lot of where burnout comes from.
mhm.
That, you kind of have to know what your values are to be able to identify that, though. So, one exercise I do work through with some of my clients is helping them identify their core values. And there's, a couple of steps I have them go through. And, a lot of the times people think they know, and they usually do know a few things, but so much of that is also unpacking like what we were taught, how we grew up. One of the biggest things I realized about myself was the difference between success and goals,
Mm,
and how they're not the same. Like, achieving a goal does not equal success, and having to understand the importance of both, but also redefining both in different ways for myself. That was something that I had to really work through with my own burnout. Um, but yeah, it's a very interesting values. Just they constantly pop up
yeah.
in this work, and it's hard to see it for yourself too. That's the other thing I've learned. It's hard to see that sometimes, and to be able to label and identify what the misalignment is. I
Mhm.
will say that if if you're burned out, or if you just have like that overwhelming, never-ending stress, you don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, and you can't quite put your finger on what's causing it, and you've done some work, like you've looked at things, you've talked to some people, you've done a little bit of work, and you still can't figure it out, there's a really good chance it's a values misalignment somewhere.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So it's almost like a
Something deep.
diagnosis by default sometimes, but I see it
Mhm.
in a lot of the work that I do.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good because sometimes we just keep pushing those things we care about down and we go, well, it doesn't matter. This is more important, and we go down that path of accomplishment or something,
Mhm.
like you're saying, success, that we have this vision of it, and
Mhm.
it's probably not what inside we're telling ourselves internally is consistent with what we want to do. It takes time, doesn't it, to uncover that? So,
It's a journey. It's a
yeah,
it's a process. I I mean, I'm, launching a book right now, and I am very aware that I'm at a higher risk of burning out right now
yeah,
than maybe I was a few months ago, and then maybe that I'll be, when I'm through this initial period of launch.
yeah,
Uh, but again, I say it a lot, but I think just awareness, and then being okay talking about it, is a big part of all of
yeah.
this.
So one of the things that we've been hearing a lot about in the press, not so much recently, but I would say maybe a few months ago, the exit of women from the workplace. Um, do you think it has to do with burnout?
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I there are so many stats out there. I mean, it is overwhelming how many of us are overwhelmed, how many of us are burned out. And it really, I mean, I get asked, like, if I'm always stressed, how do I know if it's burnout? That's a question that I'm asked frequently. But yeah, for women specifically, and I think, I think in a lot of the ways things are a lot better than they were even a
Yeah,
decade ago. But I mean, even I look at myself and my sister and my brother.
yeah,
My sister and brother both have kids. They're both grown. They're both out. All of them are out of the house now. I don't have kids, but I look at caregiving responsibilities that just seem to land on my sister's plate and on my plate with our parents. And my brother will help. He will do whatever we ask him to do, but we still have to ask him to do it.
uh-huh.
So sometimes it's just easier for us to do it. And I
Mm,
think I think that there's a lot of that for women everywhere, at work, at home. And I don't
Right.
know if we all just need courses about how to delegate better and how to just not do something we delegate. I don't know what the answer is there, but I do think that um
Yeah. Not waiting till you need oxygen or something or that.
yeah, there's something about
It's like,
like,
oh,
I mean, I get,
definitely.
there's one of my friends, she's written a book, she talks about the efficiency tax. And I think, where they always, everybody's heard the saying, if you want something done, give it to a busy person.
Hmm.
When you think about a busy person, what's the image that comes to mind?
Yeah. Well, a crazy person. I mean, how about me? What do I look
I
like?
think of a mom with two kids in school, probably middle school, who's running a whole household, who's working a full-time job, who's
Yeah.
also volunteering for something.
Yeah.
That's what I think about when I hear busy person, that's the image that comes to mind.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing I'm not the only one. So yeah, I think what back to your original question, yeah, I think burnout is a lot of the reason why we're seeing women exit the workplace. There's a lot of other reasons, but I think that that's one of them. And I think and a lot of work that I do, I work with entrepreneurs, but what a lot of the business owners I work with are actually still working full or part time and, quote unquote corporate America while running or starting a side hustle so that they can get out of
Yeah.
corporate America.
Yeah.
Now, I'm I don't ever want to be the bearer of bad news, but being a business owner is also not easy. So, I'm like, let's check that first before you jump. Uh, but there's something about having some control,
Hmm.
and I think that that's what ultimately it, women are leaving the corporate workplace because I feel like for whatever reason, they're looking for more control over their workplace, their life, their
Yeah.
flexibility, whatever it is. And a lot of that is coming from the burnout that they're experiencing
Yeah.
due to, I think, they're the busy people who get things done.
Yeah. Such a good point, Julie. Oh my God. I think back and I kind of go, oh God, working
Well, and then
through and all of those things, right?
you've also got the, and listen, I don't want to beat up on any other gender, because there are a lot of non-women who are out there trying to do and change, trying to help things get better.
Hmm.
But I think that when you there's just this expectation that when you're in any minority when you're in any minority and it's said a lot of ways, but I've for some reason I just rewatched Scandal. And one of the sayings in there was you have to work twice as hard to get half as much, and that was very much about black people
Hmm.
and what they have to do. But it's and I don't want to say it's the same for women, but there is that you got to work you know twice as hard to get half as much as what maybe your non-woman male counterpart might get.
Yeah.
And I think because of that we do it, and I think because we do it we burn out.
Mm. So we talked a little bit about some steps that some of us can take for personal recovery, but what else do you want to cover about that?
One thing I think is really important to note, and this is something that came out when I was writing my book and doing my research that I didn't really see elsewhere. Dealing with the whatever's causing the burnout or and the problems the burnout causes is a completely different step from recovering from that burnout.
Mm.
So, and what I mean by that is let's say you figure out what's causing the burnout and you fix it at work or you fix it at home. That doesn't mean you've recovered from what that burnout has cost you. You then need to take some actions to help yourself recover from that burnout. And that might be when a vacation shows up. That might be when, once you've started dealing with the problem, you feel like it's under control, you've put a band-aid on it, you've got a plan to fix it for the long term. then I think you have the space to actually deal with and do take some personal recovery actions. And that, that can be a lot of different things for a lot of different people. For me, I advise in my book to always look for things that you've done before that have replenished you. So I called
Mhm.
them, known and then will work for you. So I might walk more, or I might, meditate twice a day,
Mhm.
or I might take that, weekend trip to the beach. And I think um the reason it's so important to separate fixing the problems from burnout and personally recovering from it, it's because so many of us fix the problem and we skip the recovery part and we go
Mm.
straight into the next thing.
Or we think the recovery part fixes the problem.
That's it too. Yeah. So and that's where you don't want to, you can't escape a
Yeah.
problem. You know, I, and I think with business owners specifically, they're very aware of this. So they know, like when I talk, it was funny when I was doing interviews for my book, I had one business owner saying, if one more doctor suggests I take a vacation, I'm going to punch him. And I was like, that's because we know, like, how do you see, like, there is a fire here and I'm going to walk away from my fire? No,
Right.
that's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to put the fire out.
Yeah.
And so that was it's like, how do you deal with that fire so that you then can take that trip or take
Yeah.
that breather
And
or do
enjoy
whatever it
it.
is you need to do.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of ways we can recover. There's a lot of things. And I have, I always say, like, deal with the thing that's the least, like, the least painful symptom you're dealing with first.
Yeah.
Figure out a way to recover from that first because it's an easy one.
Yeah.
It's most likely an easy one, but I think overall it's that separation between addressing the problems that the burnout's causing and then personally recovering from, like, what that cost you,
Yeah.
what that did to you, two totally different steps.
So, what a couple questions before I end my episodes. I always like to ask our guests, what advice would you give to millennials and younger generations? And you've given some terrific advice through this whole thing. Is there anything else that you would like to tell them?
I would tell I would tell millennials to learn how to walk with people, to learn how to meet somebody where they are and not and this is I'm technically a millennial. I'm like an old millennial, but I'm technically like right on that line. I would tell millennials to learn how to meet somebody where they are and either sit with them or walk with them and not try to pull them with them, but walk with them and change together. I think that there's something very it you can, walk very far together, or you can, get somewhere fast. I'm butchering that saying, but that's the gist of it. There's just something about being able to do that I think that a lot of younger generations don't have that I think they need. And so that's
Mm.
what I would advise them to learn how to do.
And what would you tell your 20 something self today?
I not to judge. Don't judge people, no
Mm.
matter what, no matter how much you disagree. Don't judge somebody. I that's honestly one of the hardest lessons I think I've learned.
Mm.
I had a lot of years of just righteousness. And now it's like everybody's just trying. I mean, I think for
That's
most
right.
of us, most people are just trying to show up, do their thing,
Yeah.
leave some kind of impact that's better, or leave a little bit of a legacy and go home. And you never know what kind of day somebody's having or what they're dealing with. So just don't judge. Don't judge people.
Yeah, definitely. Well, my darling, it was so much fun. I so, as you know, love this topic and thought, oh, this is so perfect for us to talk about. And thank you so much for joining us today. It was just such a delight, even though it was such a heavy topic.
Yolanda, it was great. Thank you for having me. I listen, it's a heavy topic, but it's one that we need to talk about
Yeah.
because m great majority of us are dealing with it. So, it's definitely something, and you can't fix something unless you're willing to talk about it, so.
Mm. Well, thanks for coming to talk about it. Thank you for listening today, and we sure hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please leave a comment wherever you listen to your podcasts. Tell a friend about us. Listen and join our public Facebook group, Girl Take the Lead, or visit our website, girltaketheleadpod.com. We also have a YouTube channel where your subscription would be appreciated. Once you're on YouTube, search at Girl Take the Lead. And we've recently expanded into YouTube Music where you can see a video of this episode. Here are three takeaways from our episode. 1. Guilt and shame often show up around burnout. The best way to begin to deal with burnout effectively is to first claim our burnout, drop the guilt and the shame, and then have a support team as you come through it. 2. There are three different kinds of burnout, and we typically go through them in this process: intentional, emotional, and physical. And 3, going on the vacation may be a band aid to deal with burnout and not deal with the underlying issue. Time and work needs to be taken to recover. You can't escape the problem. Our next episode will be about self care, and there are some great books we can reference to help us through the conversation. I was thinking we could all use a little more self care and self love these days. Please join us again and talk to you soon. Bye.